New Thought Media Network is pleased to present The Inclusive Church, Ideas and Resources for Leaders of Multicultural Ministries. The Inclusive Church with Tracy Brown. Tuesdays at 12 noon Mountain Time. Join Tracy and her guests as they go deep and share practical tips and resources you can use in your ministry. And now let's explore the Inclusive Church with Tracy Brown.
Hey everybody, it's Tracy Brown, and this is the Inclusive Church show. And I am loving the opportunity to take an intentional moment during my week to stop and ask the question, what does it mean to be inclusive? To stop and recommit to how can I help others achieve the goal of having a ministry that's inclusive. I love having the opportunity every week to look at different topics and to talk with different people and to move the conversation from one that is about politics and power into the realm of dialogue around the spiritual imperative and how being inclusive is simply a representation of the true intention of Christ consciousness, the true intention of living guided by spiritual values. And I'm guessing you heard the icon or the reminder, not icon, the ringer on my phone telling me it was time to be in the show. Actually, that's what that was. So I am turning the sound off on my phone. That's what happens when you pop into a show that is being offered live. Those things just happen. And I know you're like me, you'll just roll with it. So I do want to suggest to you that if you were not with us last week, please go and look for the conversation I had with Reverend Dr. Petra Weldes. That conversation was so fabulous, in my opinion, because Petra has been taking the commitment to live the principles and to be inclusive in lots and lots of different ways for a couple of decades. And so in that conversation, we got the opportunity to talk about what happens in the long haul and how do you try different things, and some things work better than others, or some things work great at the time that you do them. But 5 years later, you need to be paying attention to some different challenge or opportunity, or what you were doing just needs to be adjusted. So it was a great conversation, and we got to touch on race and gender expression and sexual orientation and gender and disabilities, people with disabilities. We got to talk about all of those topics and probably a couple more in the context of a spiritual community. But today I'm going to focus on the Transgender Day of Visibility. And I have been surprised that when I've mentioned the Transgender Day of Visibility, or TDOV, that I've been surprised at how many people have said to me, what? Like, what are you talking about? What is it? And so I'm going to just spend a little bit of time today, and it's, of course, intentional, but I'm going to share a little bit about the Transgender Day of Visibility. I'm going to share with you a number of resources that you can go to for more information. We're going to talk a little bit about why we why this is an important conversation to have and an important topic to engage around in our spiritual communities. And I'll spend a little bit of time on some options for next steps or future action. So that's the umbrella for our time together. It really is designed around the what is it, the why should I care, and what can I do on two levels. What can I do for the community, what the community that I am leading or I'm a leader in, and also what can I do myself as an individual who is guided by spiritual principle. So that's where we're going today. And in case I get so caught up in this topic and I forget, let me just give you a tiny preview that next week I'll be talking with Reverend Karen Lindsley. And oh my gosh, like we're going to be talking about what, if you know Reverend Karen, you know that her theme is feral living, right? Gonna live full out. And we're going to be talking about what that means to people who are committed to being allies to different groups. So today, TDOV, the Transgender Day of Visibility. And one of the reasons we're talking about it today is because the annual Transgender Day of Visibility is March 31st. And so it's coming up in just a few days in 2024. It is on Sunday. March 31st is Sunday. It also this year overlaps with Easter because Easter is early. And some of you may be able to do something with making a connection between the message of Easter and the experience of our transgender family members. And there are so many places that you can go. So TDOV has been around for not quite 15 years in an official way, but getting really close, really close to 15 years. And I love, one of the things I love, and one of the reasons I got really excited when I learned about Transgender Day of Remembrance is because prior to the creation of this formal way of recognizing, the only other date that was on the calendar that was specifically related to our transgender friends and family members was the Day of Remembrance, which happens in November 20th, or in the latter third of November. And it had always struck me that absolutely for the Transgender Day of Remembrance, I will always recognize and recommit to doing things to reduce the number of people who are transgender who are killed, or and even beyond the Day of Remembrance, the idea that there is so much violence for that people who are transgender often encounter. But the Day of Remembrance was about remembering those who had been murdered, or those who had been killed, those whose lives were ended because they were transgender in the previous year. And while I I do think that's really important, and I will continue to observe that and honor it and educate people about that as long as I am alive in this form. It struck me too that, wow, what about all of the people who identify as transgender, who are living, who are alive, who are living full out and being their best self? And in New Thought, we are so big on people creating lives they love and living with authenticity. I mean, we teach that and we model that. And so it seemed to me like a little curious. Why did it take so long to recognize that, wait, we need to be honoring and celebrating and valuing the lives of people who are transgender 365 days of the year. And we need a day to remind us or to commit to us, or a day where we can commit to education. So since 2010, we have had a formal international day for a day of visibility. And I also love that it is visibility. So it's not history, although history is part of visibility, right? It's not recognizing the struggles of transgender people, even though that is important and could be incorporated in what you do. It's visibility that we're here, visibility that we are living fruitful lives and lives going to work and being in family and participating in the community just like everyone else. And to have that positive visibility really helps to not only educate, but also to, I don't like this word, but I'm going to use it, also to normalize, right? Normalize and let people actually, if they were not aware, that they are actually encouraged to recognize and acknowledge that we have all kinds of people in our community that we live in and in our spiritual communities that we want to have and that we recognize that many of us have. All kinds of people in our communities, and that we are happy about that, and that we understand the work that it takes to be inclusive, and that we're committed to doing that work together. So what you're seeing here is, I'm just going to share a variety of websites that you might go to for more information for your own personal education. And so the website for GLAAD is a good one for basic information about the Trans Day of Visibility. It includes information about the creation of the observance. It also includes reminders about why this is important. In the current page, you can see it highlights in the middle, in 2023, more than 400 anti-LGBTQ bills had been filed, and that was in 2023. And if you have followed the news at all, then you know that that has continued to be a pattern that's increased in 2024. And so this paragraph, that's why it's still necessary for trans people to be seen through authentic, diverse, and accurate stories which reflect the actual lived experience of trans people, both for themselves and for those people who believe they've never met a trans person. GLAD also is really good about having information and guidance for the media. And one of the reasons I often recommend spiritual leaders go to GLAD and pay attention to the media section and the instructions for the media is because in our spiritual communities, even though we don't think of ourselves as the media, when we are sending out newsletters or sharing information, even with our own members and guests or people who come to our events, we want to be sure that we are sharing information properly, that we're using the current appropriate languaging for how we talk about people who are transgender. And GLAD also, as you can see, has additional resources. Let me make this a little bit bigger for you. Resources on transgender healthcare, on specific issues facing youth and young adults and who identifies transgender, and ways to be an ally. So that is GLAD. And it's probably I usually will give people at least 3 resources. But if for some reason I'm only sending people to one website, this is the one that I most often would send to. I'm also showing you, not that, let's remove that. And let's go to, you can go to PFLAG, and PFLAG's Transgender Day of Visibility page has, again, some really good basics. Let's stop that screen and go to a different screen. Yes. So PFLAG, parents and family members, are the target people who may not personally identify in the LGBTQ plus spectrum, but actually have people they love or they interact with. And so they have a whole toolkit, which is really great, again, for resources. And they have some online learning that you can access. So in addition to GLAD and PFLAG, there are dozens of sites. You can even go to Wikipedia and get some basic information. But that's where you start, right? You want to understand the basic information. You could also go to HRC, the Human Rights Campaign. They have really, really good information about the Trans Day of Visibility. And any place that you have found that has been helpful for you in the past with LGBTQIA, any of the places you have found will probably also have a specific page or pages related to the Trans Day of Visibility. So let's talk about why we should even be talking about this. You know, I'm clear that one of the reasons I keep being called to do more about related to or spinning off from the Stained Glass Spirit book, and I continue to make myself available to lead dialogue or facilitate challenging conversations for people, around all of the different dimensions that we would put under the umbrella of diversity. It's really because I'm confused. It's so clear to me that if we are committed to love, let's just start there. Love. If we are committed to harmony, if we are believing in wholeness, if we believe in oneness and that there's one source that has created all of life, that is creating all of life, that it will always be creating all of life, and that it creates life from itself, right? And everything it creates is an expression of it, of spirit, of the creator. I don't get it why people continue to behave and to speak from a place that says there are some people who are worthy of love and respect, and there are other people who are not worthy of love and respect. There are some people who I will engage with, and there are other people I won't engage with. I, I know, because it makes no sense to me, that I shouldn't be surprised that I find myself in these kinds of conversations often. I won't say every single day, but often. And sometimes they're really, really challenging. But this is why in our spiritual communities, especially New Thought spiritual communities, this is why we have to be not only in the conversation, but we have to be the ones who set the example. Now, what we know is true is that for many of the people who come to our centers, our churches, our focus group events, our meditations, our however our ministry is engaging with people, what we know is that many of the people who come and engage with us in however we are expressing our ministries think that talking about transgender people in our communities or in our spiritual communities is a political issue. We know this. And that's all the more reason for us to talk about it more, because what we know is that, on one level, everything is a political issue. Everything. Anytime you have people together and you have a system that is governing those people, and a system that creates policies and that creates legislation and law, anytime you have any of that, every time a decision needs to be made, it's political. Our cultures are created partially, not totally, but partially, as a result of whatever political systems we are engaging in the bigger world. But our primary reason for having these conversations in our spiritual communities is because we are guided by a spiritual principle, which is, at least when I talk to people who are spiritually grounded, it's easy to get clear that we are following a divine intention. We understand that our mission is to create heaven on earth. We understand that the Creator has created every kind of person, and that there is not in the mind of God or in the mind of the Creator a hierarchy that says people who are this race are superior to people who are this race. People who have this gender expression are superior to people who have this gender expression. People who are in this age group are superior to the people who are in another adult age group. Like, that is ridiculous. Ridiculous, just ridiculous. So if we believe what we teach, then why wouldn't we be having these conversations about how we welcome people who are transgender, how we engage people who are transgender, how we learn from people who are transgender, how we highlight and feature people who are transgender, the same way we welcome, engage, feature, or highlight people who are not transgender. And in order to do that effectively, we do have to learn. We have to learn what we don't know. And we have to ensure that people in our communities who may not be aware that they have interacted with and engaged with coworkers or neighbors or vendors or people in the community that they didn't even know were transgender, because just like every other factor of diversity, you cannot always tell by looking at someone what their story is or how they identify. Let me say that again. We cannot always tell by looking at someone what their story is or how they identify. And a lot of times in this topic of engaging and respecting and involving and including people who are transgender, a lot of times people have an assumption, oh, I can look at you and know. And when people tell me that or something like that, well, we don't have anybody in our church who's transgender. I always in my head go, are you sure? How can you be sure? Have you asked every person? And often I will say, really? And I will say, like, how do you know that? And they'll say, well, I haven't seen anybody who looks like they're transgender, which also gives me the opportunity and gives you the opportunity, if you find yourself in that kind of conversation, to say, well, how would you know if someone didn't tell you? And you get all of the stereotypes, all of the assumptions, all of the myths that maybe people have heard from the media or read in the media or seen in the one film that they watched that had a transgender character in it. So we have our work to do. We have a lot of work to do. And the biggest part of our work, beyond our individual learning and building comfort and confidence, beyond our individual work as leaders in spiritual communities who are committed to inclusive ministries, the biggest work is getting people to talk about and to recognize that they don't know what they don't know. So breaking that existing link that is in the minds of so many people that we shouldn't be talking about this because it's about the politics, and using the fact that you have spiritually grounded values, or there are expectations for how we live in the world. For many of our New Thought communities, they would not use necessarily the phrase that was so popular in Christian evangelical communities a couple of decades ago. What would Jesus do? But we could ask that. What does Christ consciousness call us to do? How would we be behaving if we were actually living the principle that everyone has been created from good for good? What kinds of conversations would we be having What kind of events would we be planning if we actually accepted that people who are transgender are a part of our community and deserve to be treated and loved and accepted and encouraged the same way that we treat, love, accept, and encourage everyone else? So my purpose today is not to give you the lecture. My purpose is to help plant in your mind, how do you have this conversation in your spiritual community, and what kinds of things can you do? I want to move to what kinds of things you can do, but I want to first share something that I have found really interesting over the last 2 or 3 years related to this topic. So in let me get the year right, in 2021, I think, maybe 2022, but very early during his administration, President Biden actually, from the White House, did the first proclamation on Transgender Day of Visibility. Now, I don't share this because I'm a huge Biden fan, and I don't share it because I'm a Democrat. I'm sharing it because often we look to what other official proclamations are out there. Who else is recognizing the Transgender Day of Visibility? And as I mentioned at the beginning, we've got almost 15 years of history. So, and it's international. So we can find proclamations and commitment statements from corporations. We can find proclamations and commitment statements from some Christian denominations. We can find proclamations and declarations from other spiritual communities. We can find them, but it's just been in the last couple of years that we also can find them from the White House, I'm looking at my other screen, from the U.S. Department of State, from the U.S. Department of Justice, Office of Public Affairs, from the Secretary of Defense. And this is an expanded level of visibility that you can sometimes use. Now, I wanted to point that out because you may be able to use it. But I also pointed out because you want to be intentional. So if you are in the community I am in now, we could probably use 1 or 2 proclamations from the White House or from national governmental agencies, because we've been having this conversation for a while. But initially, when people were having a negative reaction, thinking you're being political and you're trying to make us vote a certain way or support certain candidates, I would not then use the federal government or whatever administration happened to be currently in power or in leadership, because that would then feed the idea that it might be a political issue. So I'm pointing it out to let you know it's available to you, but be very conscious about whether you use it or not. Your strongest point, especially if you're early in this conversation, is to use your spiritual principles and your spiritual values. What you can always count on is that you can focus on the issue being respect and spiritual alignment, not rights. I hesitate or I pause every time I say that or something like it, because it's easy to misunderstand from me saying that I'm saying rights are not important. I think they are. I believe they are. I know they are. And I'm talking about how do you educate people in your spiritual community to get to the point where they care about the rights, but the rights are not causal. They care about ensuring that people have rights because their motivation is to create heaven on earth, and to do that in alignment with their commitment as spiritually inspired and guided people. Once you get them there, then you can talk about, hey, some of us need to really be involved in this effort that other people are labeling as right. You can get them involved in political action efforts because they understand their biggest motivation is to be involved, just like they would be involved in voting for or researching or speaking up about property rights, right? So it just becomes another way of being engaged. So what can you do? What can you do? Okay, Tracy, you've been talking to us about what it is and why it's important to us as new thought, spiritually grounded people. But what can we do? We're people of action. And I'm laughing because actually, a lot of times in New Thought, we are pretty passive, but we like to say we're people of action. And so I know some of us are people of action and we want to know what to do, what we can do. So I'm well aware that I'm sharing with you on March 26th, and the 2024 Day of Visibility is March 31st. Well, every year it's March 31st. So if you have not already planned anything, but you do have any events, or you have any, if you have a service, a celebration service, or a Sunday service, you can simply make one or two sentence statement about, as we are celebrating Easter today, we are also honoring the Transgender Day of Visibility. And, maybe one other sentence. You can do that. That is like, low hanging fruit. Another low hanging fruit is if your ministry has social media and you are using Facebook, Snapchat, Instagram, X, if you are using any social media, that you have a few days where you could create a social media post, or you could go to one of the websites that has information and grab a graphic. You could go on Canva or however you make your graphics and grab a graphic that someone else has created, or create one and add your logo, and simply have a post that posts on the 31st, acknowledging the Transgender Day of Visibility. So that's like low hanging fruit with only, 2 days or 3 days to prepare. But there are lots of other things that you could do, and maybe some of them, depending on your community and how you're set up, maybe some of these you actually could do and pull together with a very short period of time. You could, if you have a brick and mortar building, you could open your sanctuary or a meditation hall or a classroom and host a reflective, a meditation, or a contemplative event. You could do a Taizé type event that just invites people to come in, and through the readings you choose And uh, the prompts you use for meditation or contemplation in honor of and recognizing the people in your community and in the world who are transgender. So you can have a spiritually based event that uses spiritual practice. You could also have an event that focuses on harmony or on unity or on love, and make that the Transgender Day of Visibility just one example that you use along with 2 or 3 or 4 others as you go through the process. So you could do an event that is spiritual practice based. Another idea is you could offer a class, because a lot of this is about education, not beating people up, not telling them all the ways they're wrong or dumb or stupid or right, any of that, but just saying, because we have people in our community who are transgender, we're going to offer a 90-minute session or a 60-minute session or a 45-minute session, and provide some basic information and some resources for people in our community who want to know more. This is especially effective if you are doing this with folks in your community who welcome, who are greeters, who are team leaders, right, who need to be able to communicate and in inclusive language. You could do that in person, you could do it on Zoom or in a webinar format. You could actually even do it and simply record it and have it play, whether you have people live in the room or not. What are some other things you could do that take a little more planning? Like maybe now you start thinking about next year. You could host a speaker. You could have any number of people come into your community or represent your ministry at an event where you have local speakers or speakers from other parts of the country who are able to talk about what is it that makes me feel welcome when I come and participate at events or in a church service or in a spiritual community. And it's education that's very specific, but it features someone who's a great speaker or an author related to this topic. If your community, if your spiritual community already has an affinity group for people who are transgender or non-binary, or if you have an affinity group for people who are who identify as LGBTQ plus, then you could encourage them to host an event and then publicize it, make it available to as many people as possible. Let's see. Let me give you a couple more ideas because, as some of you know, I am really all about not just what do you know, but what do you do? Like, what are you going to do? So I already mentioned a short-term low-hanging fruit is to post on social media. But if you're thinking about, okay, let me begin to think about over the next 12 months, so I'm really ready for March 2025, then again, you might have an entire social media campaign that starts in, in a month earlier or 6 weeks earlier, where you're providing information and education up until and through March 31st. And those are the things that are coming to mind right now. The other supportive things that come to mind are, yes, March 31st is the Day of Visibility, Transgender Day of Visibility. But don't let this be the only thing you do all year. So another thing that I love about TDOV being March 31st is that then in April and May, we can be doing some intentional planning and communication that provides us a good leverage place for June if where you live celebrates Pride Month in June. There are a few places in the US and around the world that celebrate Pride Month in September or October, but in many places, in most places, June is the focus for Pride Month. So you could do something at the end of March. And then in April and May, you're working behind the scenes to do some very visible things in June for Pride Month. And then you could be planning for the Transgender Day of Remembrance in November, right? And then you have December, January, February, and you're back 4 months later at March again. So I do want to encourage you to do more than just think about, oh, March 31st, we're going to do some really big stuff, and then go silent. We don't need you to go radio silent. We need you to build this in to the flow of how you are addressing your commitment or demonstrating your commitment to be inclusive all year long. So I hope this is really helpful for you. A little bit about what is the Transgender Day of Visibility and where you can get more information. Why this is important for us to be talking about in our spiritual communities. We have to stop shying away from this topic, and we need to build our confidence and our competence, which happens when we are super clear about how it is in alignment with our spiritually based teaching and our commitment to wholeness and harmony and unity and love. But we need to be able to articulate that clearly so that people in our communities are not confused. And then just a few ideas about how you might do that. If you need more ideas, obviously you could drop your question in the chat, or you can visit stainedglassspirit.net. And there are posts throughout the month, not every day of the month, but throughout the month to answer questions or to inspire you. And obviously on March 31st, we will have a couple of different posts going out in social media, both on the website and on our Facebook page. So you can also look to see what we are doing there. One final note, and then we're going to close out for today. When you make a commitment to be inclusive in general, and when you make a commitment to be inclusive, to be an inclusive ministry, specifically as it relates to people who are transgender, just like every other group, there is intersectionality. There is, what you're focusing on with people who are transgender. And there are the same conflicts that occur where there are misunderstandings or where there are conflicts that come up that seem to be based on stereotypes or miscommunication. And so I just want to remind you that developing your skill in having hard conversations is really important. It's really important because if you as a leader are uncomfortable and don't have your tools in your toolkit, it makes it really, really challenging to deal honestly, authentically, and spiritually with whatever comes up from members of your community or members of the transgender community. And so these conversations are not always easy, but I'm here to help you. There are many of us who are here to help you navigate these conversations so that we all can be part of and be leaders of inclusive churches and communities. My name is Tracy Brown. Again, next week, I'll be talking with Reverend Karen Lindsley about being fearfully, being feral as an ally to communities that are not part of your personal identity. And so I hope you'll join me for that. And then throughout the month of April, there are a number of guests who will be joining me, and we are going to have a great time. But it'll be an even better time if you are with us. See you next Tuesday, 12 noon Mountain Time, right here on the New Thought Media Network on the Inclusive Church Show.
Thanks for watching The Inclusive Church with Tracy Brown. Join us again next week at 12 noon Mountain Time.